I don't want to get a call at 2 a.m. from a tenant to fix a leaky toilet. I don't want to have to chase tenants every single month just to collect rent. Here are some of the excuses that I hear from people as to why they don't want to own rental properties, when in reality, these are exactly that, excuses. They're not actually real. I have over 300 tenants and I've never received a call at 2 a.m. to change a leaky toilet. This is one of those situations where people are talking about something that they've never actually experienced. Now, obviously, these things can happen, but I find it funny because there's people out there that say this, but yet they go and work for somebody else for 40 years. So you'd rather not have an occasional tenant you have to chase down or an occasional maintenance call, but you're okay working for someone else for 40 years to maybe be able to retire in your 60s or early 70s. I think people need to think things through a little bit more, and I think you would probably rather have an occasional maintenance call or occasionally chase a tenant for rent as opposed to working for somebody else until you're 65 years old. Welcome to part 3 of my BRRRR series, where I'm breaking down the BRRRR's method and talking specifically about each step. I already talked about buy, already talked about rehab, and now we are into the rent part of the BRRRR's method. I'm going to talk about how to price your property, how to attract the best tenants, how to maximize cash flow, as well as give you some additional options that you're probably not considering when you're buying rental properties. So in this video, we're really going to break down one of the scariest parts about the BRRRR's method and about owning rental properties is having somebody else live inside your property and have to manage that person and that property. But like most things, if you set systems into place and you do things the right way, it's not near as scary as it sounds. If you want to create wealth owning rental properties, hit that like button. The first thing I want to cover is charging the appropriate rent when you're listing your property. Now, I talked a little bit about this earlier in the buy video when I talked about the cash flow formula and how to figure out if you're going to cash flow or not. The top part of that formula is rent. You take rent and you minus out all your expenses. Now, there are different ways to figure out how much to rent your property for, but I think there's a right way to do it. And I think the best way to do it is to charge 90% of rent. If a property can rent for $1,000 a month, I'm usually charging anywhere from $900 to $950 a month because I do want to give my tenant a little bit of a deal. Because guess what? Tenants have options, especially good ones. And if you want to cash flow the most, it doesn't always mean charging the highest rent. Because I'm going to cover the most expensive part about owning rental properties here in a minute, and charging a little bit less rent can potentially give you way more cash flow. So how do you figure out what actual market rent is? Similar to comping your property and figuring out what it's going to be worth once it's fixed up, you find rental comps. So go online and find properties that are currently for rent in that area. You can use Zillow. The little purple icon is properties that are for rent. So go there and find properties that are the same as your house, a 3-bed, 2-bath, 1,500 square foot house. Find out what other 3-bed, 2-bath, 1,500 square foot houses are renting for in that specific neighborhood or in that area, and that's what yours can rent for. And I usually take that and just subtract out a little bit to give the tenant a good deal. I promise it makes more financial sense than maximizing rent every single year. Because if you want to get into the game, you need to be a long-term thinker and think like wealthy people do. And wealthy people think years ahead, not days ahead. And charging a little bit less for rent is thinking years ahead. All right, so how do you attract the best types of tenants? The best way to attract the best types of tenants is A, to do a good job on the rehab side, meaning you rehab the property and you made it nice and updated because, again, good tenants have options. So you want your property to visually be appealing so it catches the tenant's attention, whether they're scrolling through Zillow, talking with an agent, or just scrolling online. You need to stop their scroll and have them save your property by having nice professional pictures and then being a professional once they apply. So what you want to do is have a clear screening process that you stick to every single time. Now we're going to talk about if you should manage in-house or hire third party, but regardless, there are rules and regulations that will keep you out of trouble or in trouble. And the simplest way to avoid getting into any legal trouble is to have a set process and treat every tenant fairly. You can't treat people differently. You can't take an 800 credit score for a certain unit and then be willing to take a 700 credit score for a different unit, or give incentives to certain people that you don't give to others. It's really, really simple. Just have a clear screening guidelines, and I'm going to give you what ours are in general. You're probably going to want to tweak yours, but what we do is we look for a minimum credit score for all of our houses. No matter what, there's a minimum credit score allowed. Then we also have a criminal background check. I'm okay with a DWI you got 15 years ago, or for a speeding ticket, something like that. But violent crimes, we do not allow in our unit, so that is a hard pass. We also don't allow bankruptcies in the past 5 or 7 years, I don't remember. So those are like our bare minimums. You have to meet this, have to meet this, have to meet this. Also, we have an income check. We get the pay stubs of the person that's applying, and they need to make a minimum of 3 times net what rent is. Meaning if they net on their pay stub $3,000, we will let them move into a $1,000 unit. However, if the unit rents for $1,500 a month and they net $3,000 a month, we're not going to accept that tenant, and we're going to move on to the next application. See, it's all about setting them and you up for success. A lot of people won't be as stringent on the income side, and that will bite you in the butt later down the line. There might be 4 or 5 months where the tenant can make it work. They're making $3,000, the rent's $1,500. They have $1,500 other dollars every single month to spend on things. But what happens when they have a big unforeseen expense? Rent is near the top of the list, but there are other things a tenant will pay for aside from rent. So we just want to give them the best chance to be successful. Life will happen to them as they're living in your property. So we go with a 3 times net rent. A lot of people do 3 times gross, which is fine, but there could be a lot of things that come out of that gross income. There can be garnishments, there can be 401k contributions, there can be a lot of things that come out of their gross income. So we take net income into account. And lastly, we call their previous or current landlord to get a feel for how they are as actual tenants. That's our baseline. There is no varying from that. So if we stick to that, which we do every single time, we will not get into any legal trouble, and you won't either. And the last and probably most important thing that we do is we over communicate with our tenants before they move in, while they're moving in, and after they're moved in. There is no such thing as over communication. Now, you do want your tenants communicating through the correct channels, but over communicate, treat them like people, and you'll be just fine. All right, before I get into the most expensive part about owning rental properties and how you can avoid that, let's talk about what a good tenant and owner relationship looks like. That's going to be have your tenant paying on time every single month. It's going to be having the tenant stay for a long period of time. If they move out every year, that's not good. They take care of the property and everything that they're supposed to take care of, and they communicate with you via proper channels, whether that be a Google number you have, whether that be an online portal, whatever is happening, they communicate with you through the right channels at the right time with the right amount of urgency. They're not freaking out and calling your personal cell at 2 a.m. when something happens, which again, I've never had that happen. I guess occasionally it could, but they're not doing that. They're going through the proper channels. All right, so that's what a good tenant relationship looks like. Now let's talk about the most expensive part about owning rental properties, and that is turnover. When a tenant moves out of your property, you still have to pay the mortgage, you still have to pay taxes, you still have to pay insurance, you still have to pay utilities, and you're probably having out-of-pocket expense to repair the property. Even if it's not the tenant's fault, or maybe it is, you're gonna have to come out of pocket a little bit when tenants move out. So if you think about it, you have money going out every single month for probably 2 or 3 months, maybe hopefully less, but you're not receiving any income. That's why this is the most expensive part. Our tenants, and we're very intentional about this, stay for an average of 5 years. So in a decade, in 10 years, I have 1, maybe 2 tenants. So once or twice in that decade, I'm having to not collect rent, but at the same time have an outflow of cash. That's where you can get into a lot of trouble if it's happening every year or two. If you have a tenant move out every 2 years, that means you have 5 move outs and 5 turnovers in a 10-year period. You can cash flow, but it's going to be pretty tough. However, if you have what I have, which is they move out every 5 years, once or twice, you can manage that, especially when you account for it. You put money aside for vacancy every single month for when the tenant does move out. But if I have 5 years until they move out, I'm going to have a big chunk of money in that part of my account. And if you have a tenant move out every year or two, you're not going to have as much money in there. So getting them to stay longer is the name of the game. That comes with you approving them properly, communicating fairly with them, and charging them a little bit less rent. Good tenants are smart, and they will be occasionally scrolling through Zillow and occasionally looking around for other properties to rent. However, if they know that they're getting a good deal from you and they can't get that deal anywhere else, a nice property, you communicate with them, you care, you're a landlord and not a slumlord, you have pride in ownership, and they're getting a 5 to 10% discount on market rate, they're going to stay for that 5 years and you're going to cash flow way more. Even though you're collecting a little bit less every single month, the difference will add up. I promise. I run a ton of different models on it. So treat them fairly, charge a little less rent if you want them to stay longer, obviously fulfill everything else, and boom, you now have a property that is cash flowing, that the tenant stays at. That's not a pain because the tenant's paying on time. It's going up in value. They're paying down the mortgage. You're getting a little bit of cash flow and tax savings. And this is where wealth can be created and accelerated through doing this with multiple properties. And the last thing I want to cover here is your options for who you rent to. This is something that makes the BRRRR method that I teach a little bit different, because a lot of the times you're thinking, I'm just going to rent for 12 months or 24 months to a tenant that's on the market, whether through Zillow or an agent or a software. I'm just going to get the property out to as many people as possible. That's fine. However, you do have options these days. You can rent it out on a short-term basis. If the property's in an area that allows it and an area good for short-term rentals, there's going to be more maintenance. It's going to be a little bit more of a lift. However, your cash flow can be 5 times what it is on a long-term rent. You also have mid-term rental option, renting out to traveling nurses or corporate leases for 90, 120, 150-day leases. This is kind of the sweet spot, in my opinion. Renting out to these traveling nurses and people that are looking for shorter-term leases, you can get a lot more rent with maybe just a little bit more maintenance and have everything cash flow even more. And then last, you can do the long-term 12-month lease for Section 8 or market rent either way. Just know you have options depending on what your situation is and where you're buying, but you might be able to go the short-term, mid-term, or Section 8 route if the normal long-term tenant just isn't quite cutting it for you, or the property can cash flow more using one of those other options. Hopefully you learned a little bit about a topic that probably scared you or maybe you thought was boring, but getting a good tenant in your property can completely change the game, and it will give you the confidence and the ability to grow a long-term portfolio that will build wealth for you. If you missed either of the other first 2 videos, make sure to check out this series on my channel. I've already talked about the buy, I've already talked about the rehab, now this is the rent. And if you want to learn more about real estate, check out this video over here. Before you do, like and subscribe, and I will see you on the next one.